Hello YouTube, welcome to the fifth video in this React testing series. During this video we are going to learn how to mock functions and components. In my screen you can already see that I created 5 examples for you today, and we will start from a very simple example with just functions, and then we will make it a little bit harder as we go along. Now, this first example, as you can see, is a random between, and I already have highlighted a mat.random. And so when we have something like a mat.random that's not stable, we can test it and be assured that the next time we will have the exact same result, because as the nature of mat.random is to return a different value every time we execute it. So how can we make a test that only uses mat.random with a value of, for example, 0.3 or 0.4, so we can test the rest of our function? Well, if you come over here into my test, I have a test that is not good enough at this stage, and is just doing an expect random between 3 and 5, and is saying to be greater or equal than 3. So this test, as I said, is not good enough yet. So how can we make our mat.random to be always, for example, 0 or 0.3 or 0.5? Well, Jest already has something for us called a jest.spyOn. So let's start by using that. Let's say jest.spyOn, and the first parameter will be the object that we want. In this case, the object will be the mat object. Then it will be the function. And for us, the function we want to mock, it will be the random. If we leave it as is for now, the only thing we are going to do is to spy on that random method. And what do I mean by spy? Well, we will record every time that that method is called. We will also record how many times it was called, with what parameters that function was called, and basically we will keep an history of everybody and every time that function was called. This might be very useful, and we will use that in a little bit. But right now we also want to return a new value out of that function. So in order to do that, we can do directly over here something like this: mock return value, and say, for example, 0.5. And so in this file, every time that I call mat.random, it will be 0.5, but I want to have different values per test that I will be doing. So instead of putting it globally for this file, I will just do the following: random spy equals to that. And now inside this before each, I will do the following: random spy dot mock return value, and I will do 0 for this test. So if in this test it will be 0, we can be assured that a random between 3 and 5, it will be 3. We can just copy this same test and change it a little bit. For now, I will not care about the text. We will come into it a little bit later, right? Let's just focus on the code itself. So the next test, we can say, for example, 0.5. And if it is 0.5, we are sure that the result will be 4. So we can add that test to be 4. And I'm already changing the text, right? So the next test that we need to do is when we are in the best possible case scenario in terms of magnitude for the random, and the max value will be 0.99999 because the mat.random will never be 1. So let's just do a few nines over here. We can copy those few nines over there, and the only thing now we need to do is to say it will be 5. So I can now run that test just to make sure that we are getting the values we want, right? And if we are getting the values we want, you already know how to mock, for example, the mat.random, the mat.floor. If you want to mock the console log, the console error, all of those type of methods that exist, you already know how to spy on them and how to mock them. Now, I already said at the beginning that we are spying these and recording how many times that function was called, when it was called. So it's probably a good idea in this test to test that our mat.random is being called. So let's just do that for you to see the possible problems that we might have with this solution. So let's go ahead, and let's do the following. Let's here in this code, let's do the following. Let's do this: expect random spy to have been called times 1. So we are saying that our mat.random was called 1 times. If you want, you can even do this. For this specific test on line number 13, it will be the same doing one or the other, okay? So we can just say it was called one time. We will do the following code for the other tests. So I can just copy that, and you will see when I do that, I will have a slight problem. So let me just run the test once again for you to see. And basically what will happen is that our random spy is just keeping all the time that someone is calling itself. And in this case, we are already calling it 3 times. So what we need to do is to say the following. We want to just clear all the times that that mock has been called. So we tell the spy to forget the past and just start to count from now, okay? So we will do the following, mock clear, okay? And now we said for the small spy that is looking into the calls to forget about the past and just look into the future. Now we can copy that little bit into the others, and doing that, we are now able to run the test again, and you will see that this test will at this time pass. And now you start to have a lot of knowledge about how you can mock and spy on those functions. You can now go ahead and start to play with more stuff. For example, you can have a mock implementation. And a mock implementation is just we passing our own function that we want to mock. In the case of the math.random, we don't have any parameters, but let's say that is a function where we receive parameters and you want to return different values based on the parameters. You can do stuff like if something in the parameter, then return 5, for example. And that's possible with the mock implementation. And you have, I will leave this one even like that, so you see both ways to do it. One with mock implementation and the other one with mock return value. So when you look into my repository, I will do a commit now, and you can see all the different approaches for that. And let's jump into example number 2. For our second example, we have 2 use cases. The first one, we have this button that every time we click on it, it will call the onMoney function that was passed to our example 2. Then we have a much more interesting use case, which is this data grid. And this data grid comes from Material UI. And usually I fully trust what the Material UI team does. So what I will do is I will mock this component, this data grid, and replace it by just a div saying table, for example. And then my test will be to check that I'm passing the expected rows, the expected columns, the page size to be 5, and I'm also passing this checkbox selection, and then fully trust on whatever Material UI team is doing for their tests. Now, if you want to see this component in action, this is what the component looks like. You can select new rows, you can select them all, unselect them all, you can click to sort this table, you can do quite a lot of features in that table, but we don't need to test any of those because they are already tested by the Material UI team. Now, coming to my component, I can go to the tests and we need to test the button. So when we click the button, and I'm already clicking on the button over here, I need to make sure that this function was called. So we have 2 ways to do it. One way that relies on asynchronous testing, a bit what we did in the previous video. So I will do this done, and only when this function is called, it will be triggered as this test being completed, right? So even reaching the end here, it will not immediately finish the test. When I call this done function, it will then finish the test. So we can do something like this, expect, and I can pass a number over here, n to be a number, and we will do the following, expect n to be 33, but this is not really clean, right? So we are lucky that Jest will provide us with another way to do that. So I will just run this test for you to see that this test will also pass, and if you have callbacks or something like that that you want to do, this done might be very helpful for you, but luckily Jest has something for us. So we can do jest.fn. I need to remove this done from there, and now we just need to do the following, expect my onMoney to have been called times 1. So we are saying it was called 1 time, and we can even say that it was called with. So to have been called with, and in this case it was called with 33. If I run this test, you will see that this test is also passing. Now we have that second test that we need to do for our data grid, and this example is a much better one in terms of complexity. So how can we do that? let's first mock our component over here, and then I will add the test, right? So we will do the following, jest.mock, and when we do this, we are going to mock the module that we put there. And the module that we want to mock is the module where we are importing the data grid. So this material UI / data grid. Let's do this. And now you have an option over here called a factory. If you don't pass this factory, what's happening is that we are mocking everything into that data grid, and we are filling everything with this data.fn, which literally does nothing, right? That data.fn is just a spy over there that does absolutely nothing. If you call that function, it will return for you undefined because it does nothing actually. So I can come over here and just do this. I will do data grid, and I will do jest.fn, and right now I will just do div, and I will call this div table. And now I'm literally overriding everything that exists in that module. If for whatever reason you still need other stuff from that module, not only the data grid, you can come over here and do the following: ... jest.require actual, and put this module over here. So right now what I'm doing is that I'm getting the module as is, plus my data grid, instead of being the normal data grid, it will be my jest.fn function. Okay. Now, in order to get that data grid, we can go over here and do the following: mocked data grid equals to mocked, and this mocked will come from ts-jest. So let's import that one, mocked from ts-jest /utils. And now the only thing I need to do over here is the following: data grid, I import the data grid, and now in this mocked data grid, I can do the same things we did with the function. I can do to have been called ×1, for example, to have been called with 33 or whatever it was. In this case, it will not be 33. It will be with the rows, the columns, the selection of the rows, and the number of pages per page, sorry, the number of rows per page to be 5, right? So let's add that test, but before we add that test, let's just run that, and now we can start to add that test. So we will say renders table, passing the expected props, right? And now what we can do over here in this test is something actually very simple. Let's just render our component first, and I will just pass a jest.fn, because in this test I will not care to check about the money, so I'm just passing a function. And now what can we do over here? I can just do expect my mock data grid to have been called one time, right? If you care about that, I will do this test over here like that, to have been called ×1, and you will see that this test will fail. If you know why it fails, let me know in the comments, but I will explain to you now why it failed. So the reason this test will fail, if you see over here, it will be because it was called 2 times. So you can do one thing very simple over here. Do you remember when I told you that our spies were memorizing forever that we were keeping the counts from the past? So we just need in this one to do the same thing, to tell our spy, hey, forget about the past. And the way we can do that is exactly the same we did before. So before each, and we will go over here and we will do mocked data grid dot mock clear. Okay, oops. And now our data grid will forget about its own past. I will just run the test, and I can already start to prepare the expect mocked data grid to have been called with, And now our props, as you know, are just an object in JavaScript. So I will just copy these because it's just a little bit easier if I copy. And now I just need to transform this into JavaScript instead of being JSX format. We will do this. I need to put some columns over there in this 5, and now this one will be true. Now, regarding these rows, you have 2 options. Or you import the ones you have in your component if you are happy with those and you don't mind that people will change them, because then if someone comes over here and changes these rows, if I change this from snow to xxx www, my test will still pass, and probably you don't want that to happen. If you don't, you will have to repeat roughly what you have here in your test and what you have here for the columns once again in your test. Okay, now it's basically up to you what you want to do. I will just show you something that might be very, very useful for you, which is when you have the columns, let's say that you only care about the field name, you don't care about the header name or the width or anything else. You can do something very, very nice with jest, which is like that. You can do, oops, I didn't copy everything. Let me just copy everything to show you something. You can come over here in the columns and do the following. Instead of having all of that, you can do this. Expect object containing just the field. Okay, so as long as you have the object containing the field, you will be good to go. So we can do this for that one. The next field will be the first name, the next field will be the last name, and I think we have the age as well. So let me just put the age. So you can see that if you just care about one of the properties or two of the properties, you don't need to list them all. It will just be enough for you to list one property or two properties, whatever you care. So I will leave this example when I will commit, so you can see that this test will still fail for a very simple detail. Let me just show you. And that detail is because when React is calling our components, is calling the components with a context, okay? Which is the second parameter. We pass the properties and then there is a context. In our case, we can just pass this context as empty because for our case, it will always be empty. And now you will see that this test will now pass. I will do a commit and you have the both scenarios over here. You have the object containing for the rows and you have the rows being imported from the component. So if you want to then change the rows to have your own rows here, you are very welcome to. I will commit and we jump to example 3. For our third example, we have something similar to our second example, but this time our button and the swipeable drawer come from the exact same library, material UI/core. If you see this in action, I can click on the swipeable drawer and I have hello YouTube over there. If I click escape on my keyboard, that thing disappears. If you see my tests and you watch my video number 4, this code might make a lot of sense to you. I'm clicking on the open drawer button. I will expect to have hello YouTube, which is the side panel. And then when I click escape, I will expect it to disappear the hello YouTube after a little bit. And this test is a good test that we have over here, but some people don't like this type of asynchronous stuff, or they don't want the swipeable panel for whatever reason. So I will show you how you can mock that one coming from the same library. Let's do jest.mock, material UI/core, and now we will pass the same exact factory we passed before. We will do jest.require actual, and now I will pass this material UI/core, and I will just copy the name of the component because I don't know how to write that. My Portuguese doesn't allow me to type that swipeable drawer. I'm sorry. And I will just do the following div, and I will just do hello like that. And so this is what will be on my component. Instead of saying hello YouTube, it will now say just hello because I'm mocking that component. And as you may imagine, this bit of my test will no longer work because my component is now mocked. So when I click, nothing happens. So I will also delete that one from there. We can remove the asynchronous part of it. If I run my test, you will see that we have example 3 also completely done, and we don't need to do anything specific for that example because we already did the expect the component to have been called that way. If you see over here, it will fail because it should be hello like that. And let me see if I have any other failure, and it's saying that it should not be in the document, and in reality it is already in the document all the time because now it doesn't go away and comes back. It's always there on the screen. Running it again, my tests will run and the swipeable drawer is all the time on the screen, so you don't need to deal with asynchronous stuff if you don't want to. I usually will never do this mock, but I receive people sorry, I receive messages on Twitter from people asking me for this specific component, how to mock it. So now you have your answer. Now for our fourth example, I want to show you how to mock something that is from our own application. In this case, in example 4, I'm using our example number 3, which is the drawer. And the only thing I'm doing is just doing that. So how can we mock something that is from our own application? Well, in this one, we will just do, once again, jest.mock, and we will just copy this import over here because it's easier to copy paste. And now you have two options. You can pass once again that factory over here if you want, or you can use the mocked from ts-jest. And when we do that mocked, we will just do the drawer, which is my drawer. So I can just import this one from there, and we can do mock implementation. And I will just do the following: div hello YouTube, right? And that's the only thing we are going to do is, instead of rendering our my drawer, that my drawer will just return hello YouTube, or if you prefer, mocked drawer, okay? Because this makes more sense than saying hello YouTube for no reason, right? So instead of saying this test right now, I will now do mock drawer. And what this thing was tested before is just the title of hello drawer component, right? So that bit will no longer be there. So I can even do, if you want, query by text, not to be in the document, and expect screen.get by text. And I will do the mocked drawer to be in the document. And basically now we mocked one of our own components. And running that test, you will see that test will also run, and it will be a successful test. Now, example number 5, I think you will like this one quite a lot. Let me just commit. I forgot to commit. Now, for example number 5 is something that you will find very, very useful. And this is when you are requesting a mock from a component. Let's say that we have a very complex component in your application that is somewhere, and I have this inside a very complex deep folder, very complex.tsx. And let's say that this component is a very, very complex component, and usually everywhere in your application you are using it, and you don't want to deal with that. It's just too complex. So instead of having to deal with mocking it everywhere, and as you were seeing in example 4, for example, we were doing a mock like that. In example 3, we were doing the same type of mocking, but this time we were doing on the factory object, and you have to mock it everywhere. Let's say that you want this specific component, this very complex one, to be always mocked in the same way. Every time you do jest.mock, it mocks the same way. So you can create another folder over here called mocks __. So 2 underscores before and 2 underscores after. And inside that folder, you will create the file with the exact same name. So very complex.tsx. And now you will put the implementation that you want. In this case, I will just call it very complex because it needs to have the same name. What will happen is it will replace this file, but that file every time we do jest.mock and the path to this file, okay? So the signature of the function needs to be exactly the same, but then the body, you just make something simple. So I will just do in the body, call it simple version, okay? And now when I go to my example number 5 test once again, we are at the moment consuming the very complex one. And if I go over here and I run the test, just for you to see that we are running all the tests, and this test is really grabbing the very complex version of it. As soon as I go and I do jest.mock of this very big import over here, you will see that we will go immediately to failing this test, because now we will have the very, very simple. So let me do jest.mock. And now that I mocked that one, if I run this test again, and I will do example 5.spec.tsx, you will see that this test it will fail because it should have the very simple version of the component. And as you can see, it's failing to find the very complex component, and the version that we are using is the simple version. So I use this from time to time, as I was explaining before, components that are very big and they are very hard to test, and we don't want to deal with them everywhere. I just create _ mocks folder close to that file. It needs to be close to that file, this folder, okay? And if you want to mock something from node modules, it needs to be in the root of your repository, okay? And when you have that, it makes your life a little bit easier, because now everywhere that I want to mock this component, I just need to put the path to that file, and it will depend wherever I am, the path to that file, and then that file will be mocked everywhere the same way. If you have a complex mock that you want to have a table with some columns or something, and you want to have always the same thing, this makes your life much easier. On top of that, avoid using mocking to mock your HTTP calls. I will show you in the next video, video number 6, how to do that properly using MSW. So click there to learn how to do mocking in HTTP calls, and click there to see the full playlist of this React testing series. I hope to see you in the next video. Take care, bye bye!